Jeannie's out of town today. So, are we still missing a Cache County appointment?
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully be doing that appointment before our next meeting.
Do we need to renew his
Yes, so he just needs to be reappointed. Because he was appointed to fill Gar's spot. And so Gar's term expires at the end of the year, so just have him reappointed.
Send myself a note to remind.
Well, it's a new year, and obviously there's some new excitement about what's going on at the airport. We appreciate your attendance today. We'll begin by calling for a motion to approve the minutes as they were provided from the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from the November 3rd meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? There's recommendation to change. It's time that we elect a new chair and vice chair. Are there nominations for chair?
If you're willing, I'd nominate John Kerr again as chair.
I'll second that.
And I'd also nominate Brett Hughey as the vice chair. That's
I'll second that as well.
Let's,
Are you two willing to accept those?
I'll continue. I'll be willing to do that. All in favor of John Kerr continuing as chair? And let's do them separately. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And for Brett Hughey to serve as vice chair. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that business is done. Jason, you're on your own now.
Yep.
Entertain us.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Let me preface your report by saying how personally pleased I am with the way you've taken over the responsibilities and are in the process of growing into your role.
Thank you.
Met all of our expectations.
Well, I've been trying. It's been definitely a learning curve, and but I've had a lot of people helping me, and so I appreciate that. Manager's report, I guess I'll kind of keep it short and fairly sweet today. Snow removal is kind of the biggest thing we've been dealing with. Snow removal and my FAA 139 inspector. Those are the two things that have been forefront on my mind and taking up all my time. And so, I guess with that, I'm still dealing with some of the discrepancies from last year. We've handled most of them. The snow removal equipment is definitely still a big thing on her mind. And being able to clear the runway within the 2-hour time frame that we're supposed to do it in. The bad news with that is, out of the 3 vehicles, 3 of the 4, 2 of them are out of commission right now. Our blower is out of commission and one of our plows is out of commission. The mechanic has been tough to get out to help me repair the stuff. So that's kind of the biggest challenge I've been facing. One of our trucks, the clutch is going out. He says maybe it will last through the winter, maybe it will not. That's probably at least $10,000 to have that truck repaired. We're going to try to get it through the winter, but I just want to make you aware that kind of that's what's happening, and it definitely, the price of all that is adding up. I have been looking into leasing some plows from the same company that we are leasing the loader from. I have not gotten prices from him yet, but I hope to get those soon. So that's one route. The other route we're taking to hopefully solve that issue is purchasing some from Logan City. That won't be till the end of this year. They have one that they're going to be done using at the end of this year. So we're going to look into the price of purchasing that or leasing some equipment. But I do not have prices as far as either of those go quite yet. But those are the avenues we're taking to try to solve the snow removal equipment issue as of right now. So that's one path. I guess there's 3 paths the FAA inspector has given us. That's one. The other one is to make some changes to our ACM. We're kind of being held to a higher standard as of right now than our index requires. And so she says we can remove some of that stuff from the ACM, and so they will not require us to follow those rules if it's not in our ACM.
Sorry, I don't know what the acronym
Oh, sorry.
ACM stands for.
Airport Certification Manual.
Thank you.
So it's a manual that basically spells out everything we do, and the FAA holds us to that manual. If it's in there, we have to abide by it.
Got it.
Sorry.
Thank you.
And so, so because the snow removal equipment is in there, we have to have it, and it has to be up and running to their liking. So it is possible to update that ACM. The only thing with it is she wants me to contact the air providers that fly in, mainly Utah State, due to insurance purposes. So that might be an interesting route that I don't know how they will handle that if we change the ACM, if they're going to like. So we will still remove the snow, it just won't be in the ACM, and I don't know how the insurance of those airlines, what their answer will be to that route of trying to solve this whole thing. The third thing that I don't think anybody wants is maybe it's more her threatening it, but lose the 139 certification. And that will cause a whole other route of things that I don't think anybody wants. So, so those are kind of the 3 routes she's recommended. I think probably the first route would be ideal, either leasing equipment or purchasing the equipment from the city to try to make her happy with the equipment that we do have. So that's kind of where we're at with the full-time employee. In our new budget, we were given the money to get a new full-time employee, but it's coming out of our reserve account, and so I don't know if that's the best route to take. I thought possibly a part-time or even a second seasonal employee might be an option to make her happy as far as that goes.
Jason, what's the purpose of that employee?
I think just to meet that 2-hour removal of the snow process. And just the weekends, I don't work on the weekends. I do have a seasonal employee that does help on the weekends.
Wait, who said you didn't have to work on the weekends? Hold on a second.
Uh-oh. Shouldn't have brought that up, huh?
They just want coverage, what she's looking for.
Correct. So I do have a seasonal employee that comes out on the weekends, and he does the inspection for me and covers things like that. I just think more coverage, more help, things like that.
But again, adding a new employee with all the benefits and retirement, and especially if it's coming from reserves, I mean, you need to have a long-term plan on where that money's coming from. I mean, we can't just keep depleting reserves, so,
So-
yeah, I think we need to, I mean, I think your part-time solution is a good one for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I agree. I think full-time might, in the long run, definitely deplete that reserve pretty fast. So, so that's something we're exploring to help keep her happy with that. The other thing, our capital improvement plan, Armstrong's here. They're gonna dive into this a lot more deeper than I will. But, one thing, and I guess the final thing that the inspector has pointed out is our fuel farm. I have an email from her, I believe it was from last March when she came after her last inspection, that in June of this year, 2023, they have a new policies, and it has to have an automatic shut-off. It's just basically new procedures, new state-of-the-art fuel farm system. So with that, I believe we were hoping the state was gonna pitch in and pay for that. The last I've heard, the state will either pay for taxiway Charlie repairs or the fuel farm. I don't believe they're gonna do both. I don't know that 100%. I know it'd be really nice to get taxiway Charlie fixed, but if we don't get the fuel farm taken care of, I worry what the inspector's gonna say when she comes back this year, because it is, like I say, it's due and in June. And so if we don't have a plan for that with her or something, I just don't want that to fall through the cracks. It is a fairly expensive fix, and like I said, I don't believe the state is gonna pay for both of them. So I don't know if we need to make a decision on which route to take with that, or maybe if Armstrong, and I don't know about today or in the future, can come up with some kind of a game plan to how to divide and conquer that, or what the best route is. But I definitely want you to point that out, that kind of seems like that might have been falling through the cracks a little bit from the last inspection. And I believe the next one's coming up in March, and so that I worry about that, what they're gonna say for the fuel farm.
A little comment about the fuel farm, and we've been working on this for 4 or 5 years. But the 2 tanks that we have right now have outlived their certification age. And they are located immediately adjacent to a flowing water source. And so potentially they're going to have to be replaced, relocated. Those are 2 different functions, replacing and relocating. And Armstrong can address that a little bit in terms of what kind of cost we'll be looking at. So it's more than just the automatic shut-off. It's there's a bigger issue there. The
Okay.
automatic shut-off would be a Band-Aid on an aging system. So for the board members to be aware of that will be helpful.
Okay.
What are we looking at cost-wise for the shut-off, for the runway repair, for the replacement of fuel tanks? I mean, do we have any idea what the cost is?
I do not have a good quote for you on that. I think Armstrong can definitely, I believe they've dug into the taxiway Charlie portion of it. We were talking yesterday and about the fuel farm, and so I don't think they've had quite a chance to really pin it down. I think they might have guesstimated 800 or 600,000 is about what it's cost other airports and for new tanks. But that's just kind of a very ballpark figure as far as that goes. Like I say, I think the hope in the past was the state was gonna pay for both of them. And I believe the last conversation with the state was, you know, $1.5 million for those two things for Logan Airport might make other airports not very happy. That's quite a lot of money. And so they kind of said, well, maybe pick one or the other and we'll pay for one or the other. We can keep pushing that route to have them do both, but it sounds like they're leaning toward one or the other.
Is there already a location designated for the new fueling area? Or do we know, again, we're obviously updating the master plan. Is that something that could change later, or do we kind of know where it will go ultimately?
Sure.
Up there real quick. Sure. So Justin Beats with Armstrong Consultants. So we are in the middle, well, we're in the starting phase of the airport master plan. We've had the kickoff meeting. We will be looking at the fuel system, bulk fuel storage, and where the most appropriate location for that should be in the future. The current airport layout plan does show a future self-serve fuel system located adjacent to the aircraft parking apron. So that is part of the fueling. There's kind of two parts to fueling. There's bulk fuel storage, which is what you have now. You offload onto trucks, and then trucks fuel airplanes. And then self-serve is what it sounds like, where you have aircraft being able to taxi up, shut down, pump their own fuel with a credit card reader, and then taxi off. A lot of airports combine those, so there's some options on which way you could go. Normally, when you start getting into the larger volumes, it's not typically associated with a self-serve system. Typically, self-serve tanks are in the 10,000 to 12,000 gallon range, and your bulk storage is more in the $20,000 range for jet and 100 low lead. So yes, we can come up, the master plan's going to address that, but I understand where you're coming from short term. There's certainly some things that we can help looking at moving forward, and especially with the discussion on the CIP, which is an upcoming agenda item.
Thank you. Okay, and
But I don't think we've answered your question regarding the inspectors coming in March. That's in 2 months. The deadline is June, so what I heard you say was that unless we have a pretty good plan as to how we're dealing with it, she is going to be pretty unhappy in June, and I guess it could potentially threaten our certification.
I believe so. I believe she would like some sort of a plan, or if it was on the CIP for some time in the future, maybe that would satisfy her. The other option with that, which about kind of what John was talking about, might be tough, but she said if we get Logan City and Cache County and the fire department to basically sign off saying they're aware and take responsibility for all these risks, and fill out these forms, that might satisfy her. That I believe would probably get some lawyers involved and get the right forms filled out. And
So in your report on the CIP, which is coming out, you're going to talk a little bit about what we have in, okay. So I'll defer, but I'm concerned about that issue.
Yep, and I believe it should be concerning. It's a big thing that I don't know if it fell through the cracks or just what. Like I said, I believe the hope was the state was going to pay for both of them, and I believe it kind of went back and forth. Maybe we'll pay for it, maybe we won't. But like I said, I feel like their last decision was we'll pay for one or the other, and so that's kind of led us to where we're at today. The last two things, I guess, real quick, I want to point out, and I believe they have been addressed and brought up in the future. I just want to reiterate them to make sure that everyone's aware. Our ARF truck, we have spent a little bit of money on it, updates and things like that in the future. The tires, I know that that's been brought up in the past. They are expired. There's an expiration date on them. It hasn't been brought up to the FAA or been written up or anything like that. I just worry if she does notice that. The date on it is technically expired, and they are pretty expensive, $20,000 range to get new tires on that.
20,000 total?
Yes. So I want that information out there is all. Like I said, it's not been pointed out by the FAA, but
Are they solid tires or are they pneumatic?
I don't know much information about the actual tire, what you mean by solid.
They're inflated.
They're inflated?
Yes.
Okay, they're not solid. And are they in good condition besides the
I
actual?
mean, they have been stored
expiration date?
indoors.
Looking at them, you would not know. The treads on them, they're not worn, they look fine.
They've been stored indoors, and the age rating takes into account that they may have been stored outdoors, but that doesn't appear on the reg.
Yep.
How old are they?
I don't know.
Or do you know what the expiration length is? Is it
I
10
apologize.
years?
No, I just, it's been pointed out to me that they're expired. I'll have to find that information out for you. I don't know how long they've been expired, how long they're good for. I know they've been expired, and I know it's been brought up to the board in the past. I think my point is just to make sure that it was aware that they are expensive, and that is something of concern that has been pointed out to me by the fire department. As we know, the Logan City, they kind of take care of the maintenance and everything on that truck, and they're the ones that have pointed it out to me. And so I look back on some of the past manager report meetings, and that's kind of where I found the information for the quotes. So I guess it's possible those quotes, like everything else nowadays, are probably a little bit more expensive, just like everything. So I can get you that information for the next meeting or email it to everybody, however you'd like. I can dig into that further for you.
In addition to that, Jason, I think it would be helpful if you would find out that information and update the quotes, because they probably will change in price, but also lead times, availability.
Okay.
Just so that we have an idea, if the FAA were to identify it and say, hey, you need to change those, then we know, is that a 6-month process? Is it a 2-week process? So we have an idea of that time horizon.
Okay, will do. And the last thing real fast is the last couple meetings we were waiting on someone that was interested in building one of the last hangar spots available. We were waiting for him to come in and plead his case because partners fell through and things like that. I talked to him yesterday, and he's not going to be able to do it. And so that hangar spot is available, and we're going to go through the waiting list and try to get someone who is interested in taking that last spot. So that's all I have for you today.
Any other questions of Jason? Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Armstrong has a number of items that they're going to address.
We do. Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
So we have a CIP list to hand out here.
Help us with the acronyms.
Capital Improvement Plan.
So many acronyms, aviation's loaded with them.
One after another. And this basically is the list and plan for your development and improvements at the airport over a 5 to 10 year period.
Thanks, Eric. Yep, I've got one for us. So the cover sheet is just kind of describing some of the history. A CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan meeting, was held with the FAA in November. And we, along with John Kerr, Lee Ivey, and Jason, Went through the upcoming list of projects just to confirm what the FAA was tracking, as well as the state as they kick in funding for projects. So the second page is, the third page actually, is a spreadsheet. And that's the most updated version of the capital improvement plan. So right now we are working on an airport master plan, which is the 22 FAA funded project. We had our kickoff meeting in October for that with the technical advisory committee, a group of people along with the airport manager that are providing input on the airport master plan. And I can talk a little bit more in detail on that in just a minute. The 2023 funding from the FAA, the entitlement money, so the airport receives entitlement funding every year from the FAA. And so the 22 money and the 23 money is being used to cover the cost of the airport master plan. And there's an acronym on there that you see that says BIL, B-I-L, and that's bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So it's additional money that the FAA got for throughout the country for airports to invest in capital improvement projects. So it's in addition to your standard entitlement money. So it's a good thing. You're getting $295,000 every year for the next 5 years. And we've been kicking around projects to be used for that funding. It's a lot like your entitlement money. The FAA has guidelines on what you can and can't spend that money on, and we follow the Airport Improvement Program AIP grant funding requirements for that. For getting those funds, they do have a local match as well on those funds. So it's very similar, like I said, to the entitlement money. So ongoing, the airport master plan. We're also working on environmental clearance for a couple of projects that we talked about using the bill money for. So the directional signs at the airport were identified as having some issues from the Part 139 inspector, Linda Bruce, a lot like Jason was talking about with the fuel. They come in and they do an inspection every year and they look at things and they identify what needs to be addressed as part of that 139 inspection. So signs replacement was one of those high priorities. So we are working on a categorical exclusion, a CADX, for environmentally clearing that. It's going to include replacing, the signs are going to go in the same location, but the bases are concrete. They're going to be ripped out, repoured, and then new signs installed to meet the requirements of the FAA. So we're working on that. And then the other project, and there's an exhibit. What's that?
The signs.
Will it be? It will. Yep. It'll be bid out through the bidding process. We'll work through the design right now, environmental scoping, and then design, and then construction.
And just a little one thing to add on the background of that, of the airfield signs. When we rehabbed the runway, runway 1735, all of the signs were replaced new that were basically in the runway complex, so everything in the RSA essentially. This project would take care of everything outside of that, so all the taxiway Bravo signage and Delta and Alpha, basically everything else on the airfield would be replaced with new, because there's a mix of older signs and newer signs, and it's kind of, you know, that's why it caused an issue with the panels and everything else. And it's easier, or it's a better solution to replace them entirely than to try to patch them and
piecemeal. Yep. And they've exceeded their useful life, the ones outside of the runway. And why that's important, another good point, is there's no runway closures associated with that on the primary runway. Since we've done all the signs to the hold bars, all the signs when we're doing work outside of that will just be minor taxiway impacts, but no significant airfield impacts to the operators. So let's see. So there's a sheet that has Taxiway India, which is it's our yellow and blue aerial exhibit. So the yellow on that drawing is future pavements. The blue is future hangars. So you can see, and then the tan colored is access roads for automobile parking and access. The airport layout plan has always shown the continued development of Taxi Lane India. You can see where it comes in. Right now the pavement ends before the turn, and it comes in, and then we're planning on continuing really this phase of taxi lane development. And so that'll open up the area for future hangars. We know there's quite a bit of demand for hangar development at the airport, and this taxi lane development will make it easy for people to come in and start building hangars. So as part of the bill funding, the discussion was to look into potentially funding the taxi lane itself with that bill funding. Typically historically taxi lanes were AIP eligible with your regular entitlement money. The FAA made some adjustments, and as part of regular entitlement money, they removed taxi lanes unless it was serving a public use facility. So if you had an airport-owned hangar or some type of facility on that was public, then that would be grant eligible. But if it was all private hangar development, it wouldn't be grant eligible. So with the bill funding, the FAA has indicated that taxi lanes are eligible for that pot of money. So we know there's demand for the development of taxi lane in India. So the thought is getting that development moving forward with private funding and get it designed, graded. We'll provide finished floor elevation information for those sites. And then coming back near the tail end of the bill funding for each year and reimbursing the cost of the taxi lane itself. So taxi lane India, getting reimbursed for that cost and reimbursing the private development funds for that. So that right now is on the CIP. So the bill funding is being used. So kind of going back to our spreadsheet here, reimbursement for that. And the sign project is also being funded with the bills. The next FAA entitlement funded project is the acquisition of snow removal equipment. So you can see that we have that listed in 2025. So I know you've got some issues right now short term with your snow removal equipment. Snow removal equipment is grant eligible, so the FAA will kick in funding for it. It's just a matter of racking and stacking the projects and priorities. So it is on there and it's shown for 2025. And then outer years, we showed the development of a new snow removal equipment building. Obviously, when the FAA invests significant funding in the equipment, they want to see a storage building to have it housed in so that it can be protected from the elements. So we have that on there. And then the outer years, we're getting pretty far out, but we do show some taxiway, reconstruction of taxiway Bravo. The other project that's on there that's not FAA funded is taxiway Charlie. So taxiway Charlie is the parallel taxiway that serves runway 1028. And as you all are, I'm sure, aware that the condition of that taxiway is it's in failing condition. It's becoming a problem. You don't keep it open during the winter because you can't plow it. The state a few years back came in and spent some pretty significant funding on rehabilitating 1028. They saw that there's value there. From the FAA side of things, that runway isn't FAA grant eligible. The FAA, when we look at capital improvements on the airport, they have their funding eligibility requirements, and the crosswind runway isn't justified based on wind coverage. So that's why the FAA doesn't kick in funding for that. You meet 95% wind coverage on your primary runway. Not to say that 1028 doesn't have value. It certainly does. It's great especially for training, and it's nice to have when you're a pilot and you're coming in and you're dealing with crosswinds, especially in the smaller airplanes that are more impacted by crosswind conditions. So,
what is the 95% requirement?
So the wind needs to be favoring that runway 95% of the time. So we look at all wind conditions under different speeds, and the FAA assigns certain speed requirements for different categories of airplanes that are coming in. So the airplanes that are coming in at a higher approach speed are less impacted by crosswind. So the crosswind coverage on that is great. There's flexibility, and then we look at different wind velocities associated with that. So there's like 10.5 knots that we look at for the smallest airplanes. So does the runway align with the primary wind at 10.5 knots? Anything below 10.5 knots is considered calm, and pilots just have to deal with it. A lot of times the winds are variable, but once it's over 10.5 knots, we want the wind to be either 95% down that primary runway or have a crosswind runway, and the two runways combined meet the 95% coverage. Some places, we do planning and there's just no way to meet wind coverage, but luckily you do, and unfortunately, it doesn't justify your crosswind runway. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. So that's why the state sees value in it, and the state funded the rehabilitation of the crosswind runway. And they support reconstructing taxiway Charlie. They feel that that's an appropriate project, and they want to get behind that for sure. It just kind of goes back to the fuel discussion. We've been kicking around. The fuel is certainly nothing new. It's just a matter of what your priority is. Is it more important to reconstruct taxiway Charlie or relocate and replace the fuel system? Those are really the big decisions that we're thinking about right now. So ideally, it would be nice to have both. Our understanding, and we can certainly have more discussions, Judd Hill's certainly been primary point of contact with the state on that discussion, but our understanding is they aren't really wanting to do both projects. They have money for you, but they kind of want you to pick which one's your highest priority. Not to say they won't come back in the future and do the other, but right now, what's your highest priority? Is it taxiway Charlie, or is it replacing the fuel system? And there's a lot of different directions you can go with fueling. Airports handle fueling across the board differently everywhere. Some airports, the airport doesn't provide bulk fuel. That's handled by an FBO, and they provide fuel tanks. Sometimes the airport does, like you do, and then they lease it out. So it's just a matter of just, making a decision on what your direction that you want to go and what your priority is.
I mean, I don't, use the airport, so I don't know, on the taxiway issue, but, I mean, the fuel issue raises concerns with me if those tanks have sort of, if they're past their date, so to speak, and they're by a running, you mentioned they were right by a running stream of some sort, and we already have to do the automatic shutoff. So, I don't know, I mean, just to me, again, as not someone who uses the airport, that seems almost like more of a critical path than the runway. But what are your other thoughts?
John or Brett, you have more use of the airport than anybody else here. What are your thoughts?
You're all looking at me. I agree. In fact, we've had that conversation, that taxiway Charlie is I'll say this maybe not kindly, but is a 3-month convenience when we can't plow it. It's usable the other 9 months, and fortunately, those 3 months fall during the period of time of the least amount of use at the airport. And so the inconvenience of it being closed is not significant from a certain perspective. The fuel form is on the verge of being critical. And if we have to spend $25,000 for that's my figure, for an emergency shutoff on a system that's going to be replaced in the next 12 months, that seems not to be a good use of our resources. And that we ought to attempt to buy off on the emergency shutoff because the new system is is scheduled to be replaced. And we probably need to quit distracting the state with numerous ideas and really focus on what we see as a critical need, that being the fuel form. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue additional sources of funding, possibly a restaurant tax, since it will largely be used by transient aircraft, or look at participation by and this is where memory gets us into trouble. It used to be that the fuel companies would be more than happy to provide the tanks and fueling and all of the cost gratis. They don't do that anymore. But there is some indication that there may be some participation available there, and we can explore that. But in terms of the state, and they were not going to pay for it in total. They were going to, they gave us an offer of $300,000. And at the time that we were initially looking at it, it was a $900,000 ticket. Those prices have come down now, and the 600 seems to be a more workable number currently. But that would still leave the burden of coming up with additional 300 from some source locally. We don't have that in our reserve. We would have to look outside of the airport assets to come up with that 300,000.
So how much do we have in the reserve? Because you were talking about using it for an employee, which again, I would not support, you know, an ongoing expense from reserve. I mean, reserve to me seems like one-time, you know, critical items that you have to deal with. How much do we have in our reserve?
Can't give you an exact figure today, but it's roughly 300,000.
So not
That reserve history came into being when the airport became an entity on its own, financed by the state or by the city and the county. Each of those entities contributed $300,000 into the reserve account. It has been added to with the sale of some airport buildings. It has been depleted in using the reserve accounts generally to pay the participation in projects. We haven't paid those out of paid our participation out of annual revenues. So the reserve account has been used to cover our obligation on all of the FAA and state-funded projects. But yes, around 300,000 is the current balance. And I agree with you, we need to do all we can to protect that from, and we don't want to blow it on a single event.
Again, it sounds to me like we've got to figure out the fuel situation. I mean, again, the shut-off is only one component, but as you said, you know, it doesn't make sense to, you know, put a new system on old tanks. I mean, I guess it could be moved, but.
We need more information, but yeah.
Everyone, does the rest of the board kind of feel the same way, or am I speaking
So
out of?
So,
there's your,
yep,
there's your direction.
that's what we needed. Okay, that sounds good. Well, we will take that, make adjustments to the CIP. The FAA, not going to be a big impact because they're not really kicking in funding on either one of those projects. So it'll be a discussion with the state, and we can get the ball rolling on seeing what the options are to move forward with that as soon as possible. Like I said, the master plan we're in the process of. It would be nice to get to the recommended development stage where we're showing the layout, updated layout, and we can have the fuel identified in the appropriate location so that everything comes together. And that's in process. Just giving an update on the airport master plan, which is another agenda item. The first work, like I said, we had the kickoff meeting in October. The first working paper, which is 3 chapters. It's the inventory, or the introduction, the inventory, and the forecast. The first 2 chapters are done, and I've reviewed those and given my comments back. And the third chapter, which is the forecast, which shows future activity levels that we project for the airport, is underway and will be wrapped up here in the next week or so, and we'll complete our internal review. And then what we'll do is we'll share that with Jason, make sure that he can give him an opportunity to read through it, and then share it with the rest of the technical advisory committee and you all. So we'll keep you posted as we're moving through that. But the project is making progress, and we're moving along nicely on that. So,
Question about, you talked about analyzing future usage.
uh-huh.
Will any of that analysis include financial sustainability?
It includes, so it's not necessary, so the airport master planning process doesn't really get into the details of operations so much of the airport. It will get into, we have a financial chapter, but it talks about the capital improvement projects that are shown on the plan and how those are funded with FAA and state and local funding, but it doesn't get into the details of budgeting, operations and maintenance type costs.
Is there ever grant funding available for those types of studies?
They don't the FAA doesn't get into funding that typically. That's normally they think of that as a local cost, your local budget requirements and the operating costs of the airport. So they don't give grant funding for that type of a study. But it's not to say you can't, it's certainly something doable. It's just normally that wouldn't be an FAA funded project.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll show, we talked briefly in there about ways, like John was talking about, other funding sources outside of the FAA. The FAA's funding sources are pretty tight on what you can and can't use FAA money for. And they really start at the runway. That's like the number one priority is runway. It's safety. And then as you move away from the runway, the priority for projects is lower. So it's harder, your entitlement money you get every year and you can use that for whatever you want. But if you need additional funding for projects that are outside of your entitlement money, you're competing state and regionally for that money. So it becomes more competitive. And the state is the same way, which is why John said that, the state looks at the fuel system as, the taxiway project, I would say they would probably fund that 90%. Because it's pavement and they get behind doing pavement projects on taxiways, they consider that essential. The fuel system is a revenue generating project. So you're selling fuel at the airport, so you're generating revenue. And so they don't put as much weight on it. It's not it's safety because you want your fuel to be safe and, operators to be able to get fuel. But they realize that you're generating revenue off of that. So they want less money in that. They want more, whoever's using the fuel to kick in more money on that. And that's why they have a lower percentage on the match on that particular type of project. So just a little bit of background on that. But we will start looking at the, getting in more detail on the fuel and getting with you and Jason and working through that. So appreciate it. Is there any other questions that I'm trying to think? I think that's pretty much it right now from Armstrong's projects.
Yeah, as far as the CIP.
Yep, and what we've got going on. But we're happy to address any other questions or help out with anything else we can.
The next item on the agenda is Taxiway India.
Yes. So Taxiway India, like I said on the CIP.
We're now waiting for a draft agreement.
Yeah, so right now we're doing the environmental. We're environmentally clearing that whole area. It should be just a simple categorical exclusion that we're working on. And then we'll begin scoping that project. We want to make sure that we have a lot of communication, over-communicate with the FAA on that project, especially since it's a reimbursement type of an agreement. So we don't want to get to the end, everything's built, and then we go to the FAA and say, oh, we want the money back for this taxiway. We want to make sure that they're completely on board, and so far those discussions are they support it, but we'll treat it just as if it were a regular AIP project for the construction of the taxi lane itself. The hangar development isn't grant eligible and wouldn't never be reimbursed, but the taxi lane itself, we want to make sure we're following all the FAA processes, that they're on board, so we don't get to the end and they say, nope, we're not getting you money back for that project. We want to make sure that we're following that. So regular communication on that, and Eric will be taking the lead through the design and helping out with the construction of that.
Then the agreement between the airport and the private developer is currently being discussed by the attorneys on both sides.
Great.
And I have not yet seen a draft.
Okay.
But apparently it's going to be forthcoming, but it's now now between the two attorneys to sort out.
Great.
Taylor, have you seen or heard anything on that?
The last time I had contact with
Kevin?
Kevin was before the Thanksgiving holiday, and it's been difficult to get in contact with him since. So my update is I plan to reach out this week and see if I can set up a phone call.
Okay.
That sounds good. And just let us know as we're working through it. We want to make sure we're on the same page with what we're providing. Our thought was to provide, obviously, the taxi lane design and then finish floor elevations for the hangar pads themselves so that drainage and that is all addressed overall for the whole entire area so that you don't have any of that to deal with in the future. But we'll work through that when we're in the scoping side.
Yeah, and part of that discussion with the FAA is being clear on what is AIP FAA funded eligible versus what isn't, so that we're not assuming something is eligible or gonna be reimbursed and it's not. And so we have a clear line between, you know, what is gonna be reimbursed and what is not. And that could include the design effort and the construction itself, so.
And one point of clarification perhaps for the public and the board, the drawing here,
Yeah, that's in your CIP.
only the thin strip in the middle and this circular strip here is what we're talking about. The individual yellow aprons would be privately funded. So we're just talking about what's the width
35-foot wide taxiway.
from center line?
Yeah, total width.
Oh,
Total width,
Total
yep.
35 feet.
Total 35, yep.
That doesn't seem adequate for the class of aircraft that we've got hangars drawn for.
So we've got that set up for Group 2 airplanes. We can talk about the specifics. If we need to go wider for that, let us know. We can talk about that.
Okay,
Yep,
but
yep.
it is,
Good to know.
all of the yellow is not being funded by the
Correct.
airport,
Yep,
only that,
just that's,
the bit within the dotted lines.
yep, in between the dashed, yep.
Okay.
And not the hangers, not the blue hangers. Those would be.
Any other questions for Armstrong?
So I know we talked about it, but I just want everyone else to be aware that the one thing that, like they were saying before, we talked about this yesterday, but, so before you had to have a public use, and I just want to make sure the FAA is aware of that there is not a public use in mode. The lawyers need to be aware of that, but I just want to make sure that that is, because that's why they wouldn't fund it in the past, is because there wasn't a public use building there. And so since there's not going to be a public use building, I want to make sure the FAA is aware of that and everyone's aware of that.
Well, and when you say aware, I think we should have something in writing.
I agree. Yep, yep.
We're all very clear.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of verbal communication back and forth on that, but certainly, I think.
Yeah, we
given
don't
the-
want to get to the end and
Yep.
have a bill that we can't afford.
Exactly, yep. Yep, nope, I agree.
So just to be clear on the schematic here,
Uh-huh,
so the road that goes in currently, that will be blocked off
it will, yep,
from the north.
Yep.
That hangar will, okay.
yep. And then we show the brown, that'll become a future access point, right along the backside of those existing hangars.
So to access for the individuals to access these hangars, they'll either come in through here
Yep,
and come down or come this direction.
correct.
Okay.
Yep. And those sizes haven't been nailed down either as far as exact, you know, this is conceptual at this point. We haven't seen the actual developers' plans for the size of hangars that are gonna go inside there, so that's subject to change.
Other questions of Armstrong? Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Taylor, have we heard from Union Pacific?
I apologize. That's what I was referencing just now, is that I haven't been able to hear from Union Pacific over the holidays, so I'm trying to get back in touch with them.
All right. No, you haven't heard anything from the developer's attorney, Kevin Allen, about the development agreement?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
Craig Adams bought that, one of the hangars from the wood.
Yeah.
So do they still have an interest of going back into
Yes.
this other area? Okay.
Yeah. One thing that we could maybe do for next time, David, if you would get a current balance on a reserve account,
Sure, we can do that.
appreciate that. Anything from operations?
Update on the Union Pacific? Is there any?
No, he just indicated that,
The update is there is no update right now. We're, since over the holidays, I haven't heard anything back.
do you know, are we continuing to pay on the holdover lease position, or is that in abeyance? Or what exposure do we have?
Well, since they elected to treat us as a holdover tenant, the case law, all the case law says that we continue to pay at the same rate. Whether those payments have been made, I don't know. I have not been in contact with our administrator.
We may want to look at that because, as I recall, that was a one-time payment for the 20 years. And so we may want to explore where we are with that.
That's correct. And so under that same payment rubric, it'd be $750 per year. That would be the yearly rate as a holdover tenant.
Okay,
So I'm not aware if any of those payments have been made or not. I haven't been.
let's nail that down. Operations, Kim, anything you're aware of?
Not that I know of right now.
Aaron?
Still growing, plenty of students, plenty of flight hours.
Okay. In December, a system called Vertower was installed at the airport. And basically, this is a computer-based tracking system of all aircraft activities on the airport that have a certain level of electronics, probably covering 90%, at least 90% of the activity. And that records it by tail number in most cases, and will allow us in the future to have a much better handle of the level of activity that we have at the airport. It's felt that activity has been underreported in the past, and so that will be interesting to see. It's also capable in the event of an incident on the airport to actually go back and do a slow-mo replay and see what appears to have happened during that incident. And so we're still learning how to use that. Kim?
Does that coincide with the ABS? I know we talked about ADSB tower.
ADSB out.
How it is ADSB out. What I was trying to figure out is if we got an ADSB tower, would it be more visibility of the local airplanes at a lower elevation? Because sometimes you don't see a lot of the ADSB until you get up to the radar service area. And I was told that if we got a tower, then you could see more of the traffic more readily.
On that one, just real fast, yes, as long as it's an FAA tower. Because we have a flight aware tower up there, but that's not reportable to the FAA. So they cannot use it as reporting information, it's only secondary information. And our tower for Logan-Cache Airport is currently in a storage unit somewhere here in Cache Valley that they're supposed to install 12 years ago, or whatever the date that was. Anyway, they haven't put the funding for it to install the tower, but that's the FAA tower that's just waiting.
That was one of the things, plus, radio frequency is another thing that I was kind of, you know, talking about. 122A is pretty busy, and the busier Utah State gets, the more, can't talk at that frequency, receive information, which could cause a situation or somebody missed a call. So I was just wondering about the frequency change of some kind to maybe help out with that.
That's something that we can explore for the Operations Committee. Radio discipline would greatly resolve it. Having one instructor talk to the other instructor about the Super Bowl party over 122.8 is probably not desirable.
And how much information is actually displayed and how long the communication is.
So those are things that you can take from this meeting and see if there's something that you can do to improve the situation. Any other items to come before the board? We appreciate your attendance. We're scheduled to meet again on February 2nd. We will be alert for agenda items to include in that meeting. If there's nothing else, we'll stand adjourned.